On the freezing night of June 15, 2020, the military forces of two nuclear-armed superpowers violently collided in the pitch-black Galwan Valley. In this clash between modern militaries, nobody used a firearm. Instead, soldiers fought hand-to-hand, using stones and iron rods wrapped in barbed wire and spikes. By morning, the freezing river water and physical combat had claimed 20 Indian lives and an estimated 40 Chinese troops. Despite the lethal scale of the encounter, the Indian government maintains a paradoxical official stance. They claim that not a single inch of land has been ceded to China. This data maps out 65 historical patrolling points along the border. Recently, Indian troops have been physically blocked from reaching 26 of them. The land behind those blocked points represents an estimated 1,000 square kilometers of territory that is no longer under Indian patrol. China is expanding its footprint through a series of incremental, high-altitude seizures, a tactic known as salami slicing. This process relies on a map from 1865. British surveyors drew the Johnson Line, which firmly placed the high-altitude desert of Aksai Chin inside India's borders. The 1962 Sino-Indian War shattered that boundary. China pushed deep into Aksai Chin, and when the fighting stopped, the armies froze in place along a new, improvised frontier, the line of actual control. This topographical map illustrates the core geographic dispute. The frontier is a messy, zigzagging stretch where India's perception frequently overlaps with China's. These diverging perceptions create vast, ambiguous buffer zones, undefined spaces that China exploits to redraw the map. This expansion relies on a specific sequence. First, the landscape is transformed with asphalt and concrete. China built Highway G219 and over 100 civilian border villages directly adjacent to these buffer zones to establish permanent logistical dominance. With the supply lines secured, Chinese troops can then walk into the undefined buffer zones and establish camps. These physical blockades prevent Indian soldiers from reaching the routes they have patrolled for decades. Finally, these physical gains are solidified through the diplomatic process. As negotiations over the encroachment drag on for months, China eventually agrees to declare the occupied area a neutral buffer zone, effectively pushing India's patrol lines backward. India's restraint is rooted in the 1993 and 1996 peace agreements. These treaties were designed to prevent two nuclear-armed neighbors from escalating a border skirmish into a broader conflict. The core rule of those agreements is strict. Neither side's army is allowed to use firearms or explosives anywhere near the line of actual control. China weaponized this commitment to peace. They gambled that India will honor the treaty and refused to start a shooting war over a few hundred meters of barren, freezing rock. For decades, India's strategy was rooted in defensive passivity. Dating back to the era of Jawaharlal Nehru, India avoided building border infrastructure, believing that developing the region would provoke Chinese aggression. The Galwan clash exposed the vulnerability of this approach. The loss of life signaled that historical passivity no longer ensured stability, forcing a transition toward a more active buildup. India is now matching China's infrastructure spending. Projects like the winding Dalit Beg Oldie Road ensure that Indian troops and heavy supplies can reach the front line in hours rather than days. The standoff in the Himalayas has moved beyond arguments over 19th century surveys. With both sides pouring concrete and deploying high-tech surveillance to the frontier, the stakes are multiplying. Every new airbase and road increases the pressure on a region already threatened by the possibility of a two-front conflict involving Pakistan. The line of actual control is now a high-tech pressure cooker, where the next generation of border conflict is being actively rehearsed.